Hey y'all, welcome to another Election Land video. Today I will be presenting the result of one of my latest projects. I'm very proud of this one. It is hundreds of hours in the making. So let me show you how to get to it from my homepage, which is linked in my Instagram bio. It is linked in my Quora, in my LinkedIn. You can find it in a lot of places. And it will also be linked below at the bottom of this bio. So click on State Executive VS Project, and there you are. There are two main accomplishments of this project. Number one is the SEAM scores. State Executive Average margin of Victory is what that acronym stands for. And then the vote split ranges. And these two tell the story of state executive elections and vote splitting in American politics. So I want to get started by telling you what I did. So first, I started by taking all the data from the state executive election results from 2017, 2018, 2019, and 2020. Every state is on a different cycle, but most of these states did vote in 2018 for their state executives. And I took all the data for the Democrats, Republicans, independents, and lesser third parties, libertarians, and Greens. And then I put them onto a PowerPoint. So every state has its own slide, and you can see how vote splitting occurred in each state. So this is a fun tool you can use to look at your home state and see how people split their tickets. And then I use data here. As you can see, I calculated on each slide the average margin of victory and then the range of the margins of victory. So for example, Democrats won by 3.2, Republicans won by 14.2. That equals 17.4. They are added together, not subtracted, because you have Democrats and Republicans in this race. But for example, in a state like Arkansas, you would have a range of 18.5, and you would just subtract the maximum and the minimum margin of victory. I also calculated the average margin of victory to give each state its SEAM score, and then I adjusted for partisan competition to make sure that every state was on the same standard, because in some states there are no Democrats or no Republicans running. I wanted to make sure that this data only represented races where members of the two major parties were all on the ballots. Now, the results from my SEAM scores tell you a state's tendency in a state's executive election. For example, my home state of Georgia has a SEAM score of -4. The negative numbers indicate higher Republican tendencies in voting, and the positive numbers indicate higher Democratic tendencies in voting. This -4 score here means that on average, Democrats lose by 4 points and Republicans win by 4. So for example, on average in 2018, Georgia Republicans won state executive elections by a 52-48 margin, which is a difference of 4. And in the state where I go to college, Virginia, 7.1 is the adjusted average MOV, or the SEAM score here. And that tells us that in Virginia, Democrats win by an average of 7.1 points in a statewide election for executive positions. So on average, Democrats would get 53.55% of the vote, and Republicans would get 46.45%. Now, there is a disclaimer with this data. Hawaii, Alaska, Maine, Oregon, and Tennessee only have one state executive, as well as New Hampshire, and this affects their results. So for example, we know that New Hampshire is a swing state that tilts blue, but since they only have one state executive, the data is skewed. So that is just a little disclaimer on those several states in particular. You need to be aware that their data is slightly different from the other states because they don't have a lot of scores to average from. Now, the interactive map of vote split ranges is also very important because this displays a state's tendency to split the ticket in these elections, and it measures the margin of split that occurs in state executive elections. So for example, the highest score in the country is Vermont at 81.3%. And when we go on the PowerPoint to Vermont, it is clear that Vermont is a unique state in that the governor won by nearly 40 points, or actually over 40 points, and the attorney general also won by 40 points. And one of those is a Republican, one of those is a Democrat. So as you can see, the voters of Vermont, about 40% of voters in Vermont voted Republican for one race and Democrat for the other. That is a very high percentage. And that is where you get the 81.3, because that is multiplied by 2 when you add the 41.1 and the 40.2, because you add when there are members of two parties, but you subtract when there are members of only one party winning state executive elections. For example, a state like Ohio is very different from Vermont because they have a very low score on the map. They come up as blue rather than green or yellow. And in Ohio on the PowerPoint, you can see that voters do not split their tickets very often in state executive elections. As you can see, the strongest Republican was 53.3, the weakest Republican was 49.7%, and all the Democrats were between 46.3 and 47.8. So the margins of victory did not have a significant difference because they were all between 6.6 and 3.7, which is why the range is 2.9. And the average MOV is 4.4. So as you can see, this is a really cool interactive map. You can pick the state you live in or see different states. And then once you see the ranges here, you can go to the PowerPoint and see why each state has that particular score. And so that is why I included that here. I also have raw data for those of you who like that stuff. These are the raw scores. And then there is a PowerPoint at the top if you want to look at your state in particular and get a visual explanation of what happened there in the last state executive election year. I would like to thank everybody who tuned in to this video. Thank you everybody for looking at my project. And I'm so excited to show you the next one that I'm working on soon. Everybody have a great rest of the day, and please share this project with anyone you think may be interested.